Welcome to the Inquisitive Minds podcast. This podcast is all about searching for answers to questions oftentimes unexplained or unexplored. We want to engage with new and sometimes old theories, psychology, or philosophy from a research-based perspective. Hello, and welcome to the 9th episode of the Inquisitive Minds podcast, where today we are talking about a term that has become colloquial, which is helicopter parenting. So, what is helicopter parenting? Why has it started to become a mainstay in how we talk about parenting nowadays? And is it good? Is it bad? What is exactly happening? And to help us break this all down, since me and my good friend John, who is here with us, are not parents, we have brought on our good buddy Matt, who is indeed a father of one. Matt, how are you doing? Can you tell us a little about your beautiful daughter and how parenthood has treated you thus far?
Sure. So yeah, pretty good. Nora's was born June 24th, so she'll be 2 real soon. And yeah, no, she's a bundle of joy. She's like super active, but also like very very self-dependent. So I think I'll kind of contribute some of those aspects to this conversation because I didn't have to kind of hover over her because she doesn't like that by herself. So
Right. Well, that's going to be our main topic today. So, Johnny, I just wanted to check in with you. How are you feeling about this topic? I know you're going to take a little bit of a backseat for this episode because you kind of didn't want to infringe on something you weren't too familiar with. So, and maybe make some people upset. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel like this topic is quite feels emotion driven, and it'll be fun listening to you guys to take more of an empirical, more like of a data driven approach to try to get to the behind of
Mhm.
certain aspects of parenting. So, I mean, I'll have some questions later on in the line, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that brings us to our usual next topic our usual next point of interest is a history. But for this one, there's not much of a long-term history. There's nothing that's notable. We kind of are introduced into the term is introduced in what we saw it floating around in the late 1990s. It kind of became embedded into the literature around 2002, stuff like this. So, Matt, what do you think is kind of the short history of helicopter parenting, or the term at least, and how it came about?
sure. So like I guess my term that like I would define it as is like parents who just pay like extreme close attention to like a child's experiences and problems, and that's about it. And then it kind of snowballs from there to depending on how your like relationship with the child, it can kind of manifest differently.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like terms and stuff, I know like overparenting was like a common term used prior to like helicopter parenting. So maybe that's just kind of the terms kind of shifted a bit and then got a little
Mm-hmm.
more like distributed with definitions.
Yeah, yeah, and when I was looking at the definition for this, it was something pretty much the same as you. It's like the constant act of looking over your child's shoulder, like either literally or figuratively, while they are living their lives, and exacerbated by modern technology, which is something I wanted to bring up, because it extends past the early childhood education and into like when they're becoming young adults and they're going to school. This was something that I learned through this research, because when you think of helicopter parenting, or at least my first thought was kind of the physical protection of children at a young age, between the ages of 1 all the way up to 10 maybe. um, and it was expanded in my definition when I was doing my research to be more about mental, taking on the challenges of the mental for the child.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Why do you think helicopter parenting has kind of come to more of a light and more prevalent these days, coming from, like you said, the research in 2002 and on?
Well, I think what's happening is that there's a whole new generation of parents, and I think they didn't like how they were brought up by their parents, so they're changing that. And how they're changing it is they're paying more attention to their kids. And there's something else about how we're seeing children nowadays, and it's more of like a commodity or like an accessory to some degree. Parents are seeing their kid as something that goes with them. You're like, oh, this is my child, and here's how excellent they are, and all this stuff. So they're kind of dolling up their children and looking at them in a different light compared to in history when you would have a kid, they would work on the farm, they'd be seen more for labor, and and stuff like this, right? So I think that's why we're seeing more helicopter parenting, parents wanting their kids to be successful, and it's good intentioned, but it's not necessarily good for the kid.
Do you think like competitiveness is driving that a bit?
So like, what do you mean by competitiveness?
Like I think like an apparent like kind of a parent's like desire for like their children to do better in school, and they kind of push to like for them to have like honor roll or you know
Yeah,
try to
and
get the
seen in
best mark.
sports too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that plays into it for sure, but I think it's more of like the parent is showing off. Like maybe that is competitive in nature, showing off, but to lack for a better word, like my kid is so great, and I am reflected in my kid,
Right. Yeah.
and to make my kid so great, I have to have a hand in a lot of what they're doing
Right.
to kind of set them up for success.
Like on the surface, like being aware and being more like involved on the surface doesn't sound like a bad thing at all. It sounds like that's what everyone should be parenting wise, right?
Hmm.
But I think what you're trying to allude to is it sort of snowballs once they go past a certain threshold and get their hand in sort of every
Hmm.
aspect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
as far
think.
as like Johnny's
Mhm.
question, I think it's like I think it's a fairly like newer and more common. It's becoming more prevalent of a parenting style just because I think in the last 200 years, like we've completely shifted our opinions and our approach to like who children are, what they are, and it wasn't even until 100 years ago, like 1919, that like there's like an international labor organization that organized that like children from like a certain age like, shouldn't be allowed to like actually have like proper jobs, right? Like they can do some like labor on the house and all that, but that's not like having a proper job. And that was just 100 years ago,
Hmm.
which is fairly recent in human history. So I think that parenting kind of style is a newer kind of phenomenon, but it also has to do with I think like the increase of like population growth within like urban life and how that impacts it. The media that comes along with kind of just living the city, um, and then just having more like interactions within those types of people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up, is urban life coming to be something that is more mainstream. And when you are when you're living in a city, and nowadays people are opting to only have one or two kids rather than a handful.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so you.
that's definitely something.
Mm,
I think
mhm.
the average household I think is like 1.7 kids,
You're right.
while even just like 50 years ago it was like 2.5 or something, and even before that it was like
Hmm.
3 point something. So like
Hmm.
it's
And the
incredible how
reason,
much like
yeah.
children reduced in like per
Hmm.
household recently.
And I think it also is resource based too. Like a lot of parents have more resources to give to their children. They're not trying to work or
Yeah,
take care take care of their livelihood first. They can take care of their kids first, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just comes with this want to be more involved in the kid's life than they need to be, right? So with that in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about three different styles of parenting that I ran into. So during my research, there's a well-known psychologist named Diana Baumrind, and she has three ideas of how parents will parent, like three different styles. So the first one is called permissive, and it is pretty much that the parents accept everything. They're accepting and positive towards their children. They will attempt to reason with their children about decisions, and they see themselves more as a resource for their kids. So if anything is going wrong, they're trying to be helpful. They kind of roll over to their kids, and they just do whatever their kids want. And this means that they have less responsibilities around the house. They have less chores, less structure, and this kind of parenting style is usually seen with single parents who kind of don't have the time to like set structure, and they're constantly trying to worry about putting food on the table rather than disciplinary actions or anything like this. So, question for you guys: how do you think these kids typically grow up? Like, is this good parenting style? Is this bad? What do you think? And we'll go to Matt first.
It feels like more of a necessity, I guess, type of parenting style,
Hmm.
where you're kind of like met with what you're given, and then you kind of have to deal with those things and kind of combine them, and you know, the outcome is kind of sometimes a hindrance to the child, but also once we actually start getting into helicopter parenting, maybe not as much as a hindrance as helicopter parenting can be. So
Okay. John, what do you think? Is this a good style parenting or bad style parenting, or somewhere in the middle?
I'm not gonna comment on whether it's good or bad, but on one level, it's you kind of you can view it as, oh, the kid has all this like freedom and sort of can develop that way. But I think a lot of research has shown that being more involved has a is a larger impact positively than just leaving the kid be.
Hmm. Yeah. So to give you a kind of an answer, these kids are usually less self-regulated, more opt to do drugs and experiment in other ways, and are less achievement focused. So maybe achievement focused is not something that you desire in your child. Like maybe you just want your kid to be happy doing whatever they're doing, living a free life, but usually they will score lower on cognitive tests and be less self-regulated. Okay, the second style is kind of the reverse of the first style. It is called authoritarian, and it is pretty much that the parents have clear and absolute rules for their kids. They demand obedience. They uphold a very traditional structure within the family, and that's considered very important to the parents, that their kids are very much within the traditions of the family. And these parents are more likely to, like, have disciplinary actions that are physical. Um, this kind of parenting, what do you think, Matt? Good style, bad style?
I think it's
Would you use this style?
no. I like yeah, I completely oppose that style of parenting, just because I think I think it's just very negative
Hmm.
towards a child and their development, and it's just gonna end up hurting the child anyways.
Yeah, I also agree with Matt, and the research does too, because these children are less apt to adopt social values. They score lower on cognitive tests, and they're more they're more rigid in their lifestyle, right? Because they've grown up in such a rigid life, like with rigid parents, they're less likely to adapt to situations, which
Mhm.
makes me think they're probably less critical thinkers. I mean, we preach critical thinking, and that's something that is hindering them even from a young age. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate to think that maybe people were kind of set back because of how they were brought up. Um, Now, the last style. This is the mix of both. It is the parents are firm, but they also reason with the child. They are they're they're not overly restrictive, but they have specific standards. So, for example, they say, like, I want you to do well in school. I want you to try your hardest in school. You can pick all the subjects you want. You're an individual. I accept your individuality as a child, but I want you to at least give your give a good try to your schoolwork, because that's what I deem necessary for you to achieve, to be an achieving individual in life. So that's kind of how that family structure works itself out. Um, they they often don't negotiate like a permissive parent would, but they also don't enforce rules that are not that are ridiculous. They kind of reason with their children about things. So, Matt, would you say this is the optimal style of parenting? Is this what you're trying to do with Nora?
Yeah, I think this is like the most, I guess the style I relate to the most. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, me and Vanessa, we weren't looking at like parenting styles like that. We were like just researching some things and watching some documentaries and stuff before we had Nora. But I mean, like our approach was more of like the Montessori method of education, which is like a specific style of um, teaching
Hmm.
children and everything. But I guess I can just define that real quick for people.
Yeah, well, why don't we just get right into that, because I'm sure Johnny believes that this is probably the best style of parenting. We can skip him. But I want to get into your research, because you did a lot of stuff about early childhood education and bringing up a kid from a young age, whereas I kind of focused more on the latter half of becoming an adult, going to college and stuff like that. So Matt, run us through your research. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so like that method of education that like we were looking into kind of has the most, I guess, benefit documented for children, and its kind of main goal is to emphasize like independence within children, and then for them to actually take on actions and learn by themselves, because children are naturally creative, they're naturally like inquisitive, they're naturally curious to everything in life, so they're gonna over time, especially early on, because that's when children learn the most and pick up the most social cues. Just absorb information by themselves, and you don't necessarily need a parent to kind of guide them in everything they do, because that's just going to end up, I guess, slowing down that learning process and that creativity for them.
Okay. So with that in mind, how is that applied? Like what are some strategies you use, or what is the research telling you to use to apply that kind of like free discovery for kids?
Yeah, so usually you want to have like, let's just use toys as an example. Like you want to have some toys that are like maybe like cognitive learning toys, you know language style toys, and then what you want to do is you want to structure that play, and so that maybe they engage with those toys freely, but you don't tell them like how to use those toys. So if they're like playing with like blocks where you put in shapes in certain ones, and they don't do that, they just open the box and they just put the shapes in because it's quicker, and then they move on to something else. You shouldn't go back and like tell them no, 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 that isn't how you play with that, because this is more of a, I guess, you're already guiding them like how something should function, as opposed to them just learning
Right.
maybe this is a better way for me to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't know. Maybe this is where helicopter parenting starts. Is at such a young age that a parent sees a toy, or in my opinion, I think even toys themselves have become more structured. Where I mean, Barbies have been around for a long time. When you look at a Barbie, it seems like it's a one-dimensional toy, but the kids can play with it in many different ways. But maybe like they're changing how they're packaging certain toys. Like for example, Legos used to just be blocks, and you just do whatever you wanted with them. But now they're always in sets, as in open up the instruction book. Okay, here's step one. Here's how you put it together. Step two, step three. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
and
you build it and
it's
you're done with it, and then it just like sits on the shelf for some kids, instead of
right.
them taking it apart, combining it with other sets, making their own
Mm-hmm.
universe with
Mm-hmm.
these different sets that like maybe they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to also ask you, because you were telling us some pretty interesting stuff about how society is set up to enforce structure, like with parks, right? It says it's even like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So like I think that's where it connects to like that urban kind of, when we were going through the terms, and when I was answering Johnny's question about why is it like a more common occurrence. I think it's because of these structured like parks, these like cities that are kind of very organized, and then they don't give the child so much freedom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we can go specifically into parks, but I can just bring up that uh, like in the United States, like kids were walking and biking to school fell from like 41% from 1969 to 13% in 2001.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think like that, all these like little things within society are kind of impacting that freedom. Maybe parents are driving their kids to school
Right.
more often, or maybe just the
No.
infrastructure uh, isn't helping kids, have a safe way to get to school. Instead of like actually before,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they may be driving on the road with a
Mm-hmm.
bike. Now they don't want to do that because maybe they feel it's more unsafe. But then there should be adequate, infrastructure in place, like bike paths for children to feel safe and do these
Mm-hmm.
things on their own.
I think. I mean, I want to check in with John, because I know we were talking to him earlier about the feeling of safety within society nowadays. Is that a lot of parents feel as though their kids are not safe. They feel like watching the news all the time, there's all sorts of terrible things. But when you look at the numbers, John, um, is it more unsafe? Are we living in the unsafest time for children? Or
No, child mortality is the lowest it's ever been. Life expectancy is pretty much always increasing. Homicide rates are way down from the 70s.
wow,
And like in terms of like the deaths that say ages 15 to 19 are happening, like there very little it seems to do with like parents' actions. Like number 2 is suicide, number 3 is homicide, number 4 is heart disease. Like only number 1 is accidents, and that's split into poisoning, falls, and motor vehicles.
right?
So really, like if you like falls and motor vehicles are the only ones I can really picture out of all these ways that the parents can have a potential huge hand in, but the rest just seem or almost out of our control in some sense, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So getting back to what Matt was talking about, which I thought was really interesting, is that we're living in a society where overparenting has become a norm, so much so that, in my opinion, kids are not walking to school anymore
Yeah,
because the parents are deeming it to be unsafe. And that is making, like, even something simple like that is reducing a child's creativeness, right? You may not think it is, but if they're walking to school every day, well, maybe they're observing their surroundings differently. Maybe they're finding shortcuts. Maybe they're talking to their friends during that time. Whereas if you're just driving them to school, you're creating a bubble for them, right?
yeah,
So Matt, I wanted to touch on this research about the parks though, because I think it's really interesting, and it's even younger before they're going to school. It's when they're still in their ones and twos, is right?
yeah. Well, it connects to what you just said with like them, being able to walk to school, and then maybe sometimes like taking a different path, and then getting a little bit lost is like has been found to be very beneficial to children because there's one of these like six, I guess risks that children should be exposed to,
Okay.
and then there's a big difference between kind of risks and hazards. So first, I can like talk about I guess the difference between those, and then risks to start with is something a person has control over, within their daily lives. So if you take for an example like a kid climbing a tree branch, the risk involved is how high they're going to go on that tree.
Hmm.
And then a hazard is like on the right of the tree is, let's say, a broken branch or an old branch that you can
Hmm.
tell is gonna, if you grab it, it's gonna fall. So it's like that you would just avoid, through lived experience. But like the risks on the left side, if you just keep climbing the tree, that's something that you're willing to. That's like a risk you're willing to take, and you're making a conscious decision of, you know, why should I climb that high? Is it worth it? And then these kinds of I guess, questions that a child answers themselves is very important because it's going to teach them more self reliance. It's going to teach them more confidence, and then also just learning from their
Hmm.
mistakes. Yeah, but as far as those like six categories, there's height, speed, tools. There's dangerous elements. There's rough play, and then the ability to disappear. So when kids are exposed to those kind of six risk categories, I guess it's been proven that they do
Hmm.
better in kind of life. So yeah,
Right. So what you're saying, Matt, is when you want Nora to learn some sort of lesson, you leave like a nail gun laying around or something,
oh yeah,
and you just let her try
oh
to
yeah,
just and then on the occasion she's at the park, you just kind of disappear. You just
yeah,
kind of whoop,
yeah.
I'm gone.
See,
And then she's like, "Oh, I got to figure out what to do." No, 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 no. But
well,
just
the
to be
nail gun
serious
wouldn't be
here, that's
loaded, but
right. Sorry,
yeah. But
but
I
that's
mean,
interesting. Yeah,
like
go on.
like there's been a study that compared like London parks that had those kind of loose kind of materials where kids could actually like maybe like build something themselves, and then U.S. parks, which we're familiar with them if you live in Canada. Uh,
Hmm.
they're very structured. They're very organized. They're built. Every kind of object there serves a purpose. And they
Hmm.
don't engage with kids critically, or like they might learn how to use something
Hmm.
in a different way. And it's shown that those parks actually have like increased accident rates. Those like structured parks, because kids will take these hazards within these playgrounds that aren't built for it. Like they'll start climbing a side of that park, which wasn't built to be climbed, and then they're more like
Right.
accident prone through that. While the other parks,
Gotcha.
kids would be like more aware of like, okay, well, I can climb this because I know I can climb it. I've kind of started building around this thing, and it's been safe up until this point. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because when we think of parks, we think of children and just like, oh, here's a slide. But what's happening with the design of those playgrounds is here's a slide and here's exactly how to use the slide.
yeah,
Right? There's no change in how you're supposed to use the slide.
yeah,
And what you've just said makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, if I'm using this slide to run up it or something, or jump off the side of it, well, now it's a hazard instead of a plaything,
yeah,
right? Because the kid is not using it how they're intended to, but it's in a child's nature to use something how it's not intended to,
yeah,
right? They're
and to
they're trying
explore.
to
Yeah,
explore and experiment with, yeah. So I think that no, I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, the risks, about how kids need to be exposed to different risks, whether it be speed or tools or anything that you listed, those six that you listed, and how you kind of develop understanding of the world around you about these risks, and how that not only helps you be more risk averse going forward physically, but also helps you cognitively
yeah,
become a better critical thinker, right?
yeah,
I think that's really interesting.
yeah. Well, I mean, those parks are more prevalent because they're kind of lawsuit proof, right? Like if a kid was misusing, you know, uh, the playground, then they were misusing it. They're in the wrong, and nothing can happen. And this is kind of like the problem
Mm,
with like I bear no responsibility, legally, and you're fine with it. Um, but, like the woman that was championing these types of like more like free playgrounds that like kids can explore and kind of interact with a lot more. Her name was Marjorie Allen, and then she said it was like these like standardized parks were like an administrator's heaven and a child's hell.
mm. Yeah, that's a good quote. I that makes so much sense, and it's sad to think that we're giving up childhood's exploring and adventuring for logistics and lawsuits. John, how do you feel about this? Yeah.
You could also make similar comparisons to how like the school system set up too, because it's very structured and standardized.
Hmm.
Where there's a lot of studies that come out on the new type of schools that experiment with new stuff, like not having specific grades or not having certain classrooms and stuff, and just seeing the results they can get from there
Hmm.
compared to just a fully standardized way of doing everything,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
is really interesting too.
and honestly, a bigger discussion maybe for another pod. I like where that's going. I like that train of thought, but I want to get back to helicopter parenting and how we're kind of constantly looking over our kids' shoulders, or you know, parents are. John, I wanted to ask you, because you kind of looked into screens, and are we, because we're moving forward with technology, and screens are becoming more prevalent, they're becoming this large object in house, and there's a lot of in a person's house, and there's a lot of research around how much screen time a kid should have, and how that maybe factors into helicopter parenting.
Well, I almost see it as almost sometimes the opposite of helicopter parenting,
Okay.
in the sense like they don't want to deal with the kid or something, and they'll just give them the phone. Or like with I feel like if you're a helicopter parent, you're gonna be with them with the phone, right? Like you'll be aware of the screen time.
Okay.
But anyways, like I think from what I was reading, ages 2 to 5 should maybe see like a maximum of 30 minutes of screen time a day. Because like it's been linked to like obesity and irregular sleep, behavioral problems,
Right.
loss of social skills, and even like violence to some extent. But to like some extent, it shouldn't be replacing like reading or playing or problem solving. Like whereas I see it all that like I see it sometimes where like they'll just hand them the phone and hope they do something productive with it or play some games just to kill the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
rather than like sitting down with the kid and reading with them or playing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like having a screen can have some positives for sure. Like digital literacy is going to be extremely important going forward. Um, there's like certain music apps and movement and stories and dance that the screens can definitely display.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, for the most, while the kid is growing up, it should probably be limited quite a bit, even though screens are everywhere.
Yeah. Matt, how are you approaching this idea of screens with Nora? And is it something that's going to be a challenge going forward, do you think, or do you think you have a good game plan?
Well, I mean, for us, it's a bit of a challenge because we're both working, and then she's home with us all day. So usually she would be in a daycare, but because of COVID, we just decided to keep her home, and I'm just part time now.
Right.
So it's just easier for her to be here. But we definitely like have more than half an hour of screen time, just because like it just like it'll just like offer a good distraction for like half an hour for this period of day when I have to do something, and
Right.
then maybe even later, for another like half an hour, and I think that just kind of adds on
Mm-hmm.
to easily like over an hour and a half a day. But I don't think it's like very like hindering to her right now, just because like most often she'll just be in the room like with me, and then she'll just be playing by herself. And then she's like when she's watching something, she's not actively. I know some kids will like just kind of tune out and just like stare at the screen, but
Yeah.
she just finds it boring, so she doesn't really even know if it's on. She just won't watch it much.
Oh,
She
okay.
just engages with music the most, and then she starts dancing whenever there's like music happens to come on. So, but
Okay.
yeah, I can't say I've had the same experiences with some parents where they just kind of like turn it on and then their kids like blacked out for an hour. So,
Mm-hmm.
that may distract her for like 10 minutes, and then she'll be running around again.
So it's not the perfect solution for you guys, but in general, probably for the best, right? It sounds like from what Johnny's telling us.
Yeah.
So from there, I kind of wanted to move on. Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add, research based, about like these younger developing ages of children and how it can affect?
Yeah, as far as like younger kids, I read one like study that was it was like so they tracked I think 400 20 plus kids and their families from age 2 and then 5 and then 10,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think this was it was an American study, so I think all the kids were American, um, and they just at first they just were observing like how the parents were playing with the kids at 2. They're kind of like how they fed them, interacting with them in various kind of like daily activities, and then the same thing at like 5, uh, including with like how they're approaching education at that level already, and then at 10 when you're already in elementary school, you're already engaged with like teachers, and then they also brought in teachers to get a better grasp at how the students were doing and what kind of they thought.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, like this was a study to see like how helicopter parenting was impacting I guess child development, and overall it was like fairly negative. At 2, helicopter parents saw that their children were more frustrated. They wanted more independence. They didn't have like the same sense of freedom. And then it kind of manifested at like 5, 10, where like the children were kind of more resilient in schools. They were kind of like trying to, they were kind of fighting to have a little more, rebellion in their lives. I guess they just wanted to like, not be so controlled, and that's natural, I think, for humans. And then at 5, they were they weren't like aggressive, but they were just more frustrated with how they were being treated, and then they just tried to like rebel, and even at that stage where they would like purposely do the opposite of what their parents told them. But I mean that might happen regardless of parenting style, but I think it was just more prevalent in helicopter parenting.
Yeah, that study is like a very longitudinal study, so it took span over like 10 years, right?
Yeah. So from 2 to 10, that was like 8 years, and
Wow.
just under 500 families, and that was I think also published in American Psychological Association or something.
Okay,
It was
that's
a
an
fairly
interesting
big
study.
study. Yeah.
That sounds That sounds really amazing, because they kind of found patterns that helicopter parenting, and they were also able to see the helicopter parenting in action, right?
Yeah,
And they were
yeah,
able
they could
to
like,
they were able to
yeah,
judge
when they were
who was doing
observing.
what. Hmm. That's that's crazy. Okay, so with that, I think I wanted to jump. I feel like we've really covered a lot about what's happening with kids when they're growing up. We have helicopter parents who are kind of being intrusive in their kids' life. Maybe they're overprotecting them from physical harms, like you talked about. Maybe they're preventing their kids from becoming more critical thinkers by specifically removing hazards and risks. But with that in mind, what does that mean going forward into the young adult stages of their life? So that's where I focus my research, not because I didn't think the early childhood stuff was interesting. I just didn't want to infringe on anybody's way of parenting, not being a parent myself. But what I thought was really interesting was that there's a lot of research about how helicopter parenting is affecting kids who are going off to college, who are trying to be independent for the first time in their life. They're leaving the house, they're living alone or living in a dorm, and they're trying to become they're trying to become independent adults who are at school. And maybe it's not at school, maybe it's just going off to their first job or something like this, right? um, and what the research found in a lot of cases, and there's a few studies that I saw do the same thing. What they would do is they would bring in a bunch of students, and they would ask them questions about how they perceive their parents to be helicopter parents or not. So how they did this was they gave them questionnaires. So some of those questions are things like, my parents monitor how I spend my time. My parents track my schoolwork. My parents track my exercise schedule. My parents manage my bank account. Like stuff like this. They ask these kids, and the kids would respond. So they're not directly asking them, "Hey, are your parents helicopter parents?" They're giving them a questionnaire to try to flesh out and understand how their parents are parenting. And what they found in general was that kids who were more overparented, like the parents had more of a hand in what they were doing, they were more stressed, they were more depressed, they were more likely to take painkillers for non-pain activities, they were more stressed out, they had lower scores, and they were in general worse off, right? So this comes from um, a bunch of different potential psychological reasons, but I just wanted to get your guys' take on how helicopter parenting is affecting kids into college. Matt, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's like this is like prime. This is like prime time where like people need to start kind of being on their own, like
Hmm.
learning, actual real life skills, and finally, have some real independence, not just kind of the adolescent independence of you're 15 and you finally can do some things on your own. But this is like when you're actually you know turning the tide and becoming an adult yourself. And I think when hard parenting is still kind of involved in that process, I can see why it's just detrimental to people, and it just
Hmm.
hurts kind of their relationships even beyond with their parents, but also with their friends, and when they're actually in university with the teachers, if the parents are involved in within the communications.
Hmm. Yeah, John, what do you think about this? And is this something that you're seeing at all in your day-to-day life, or when you're going to school yourself?
Um, I don't know if I really saw it because it's hard to really know, like, if someone's
Hmm.
feeling stressed or if somebody's feeling anxious or, like, if their parents are to blame or whatever, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
hard to see on the surface, but I could totally see why, like, these results are happening, right? Like,
Hmm.
if for, like, a moment your parents are, like, unavailable and something happens, like, they don't necessarily have built up the thinking skills or know what to do in certain situations without going straight to their parents,
Hmm.
and that can definitely have a hindrance on them, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I wanted to make a few points about why kids are getting stressed when they're helicopter parented, because you kind of think, well, oh, the helicopter parents are taking care of everything for them. Why are they so stressed? Why are they more on average stressed than kids who are more independent? Well, what's actually happening is that if there's ever a trivial, something trivial has gone wrong, the kid will react in a much more stressed way than a kid who's independent. They have much worse coping skills, self-regulation skills as well. And then there's also something that I wanted to touch on about narcissism. When you're growing up and your parents are kind of dotting on you all the time and making sure you're okay and doing things for you, you kind of will naturally develop this sort of narcissism that you are a very important individual, right? Which is not something that most of us deem a good quality in other people, right? We don't like that, and it's causing these people to think, well, why aren't you doing this for me, or why isn't this happening for me when they're growing up? Because they've always had it happen for them when they're a kid. So now they're becoming more stressed because they're not real, like these things are not happening for them, and they're fairly narcissistic in nature. I thought that was really interesting.
I think there's like kind of denying that that's happening, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've always seen a rise in that type of behavior generally, but it just might be kind of like that's very personal opinion, you know. So it might not be true, but yeah, this might not just be related to helicopter parenting, but our kind of general, you know, social media trends and all these things that might actually impact that. Those narcissistic
Right.
qualities kind of combining, and as most often things do, they just kind of, it's never because of just one sole purpose, but a combination of things that kind of can negatively affect society.
Did you see any examples when you were gone for school, Peter, with this particularly, that there were certain kids that were like overparented or almost like sheltered?
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it somewhat with individuals who kind of thought they were very unlucky because certain bad situations were happening to them more often. But when you kind of step back and look at what was happening to them, they were just not dealing with the situations as they were coming up. You know what I mean? Some
Mm-hmm.
people who, felt as though they got a bad grade because the prof wasn't teaching them properly. I think this is a common one. It's like, oh, this prof kind of sucks.
Yeah, he
I'm getting
doesn't
a
like
bad
me.
grade, or yeah, he doesn't like me, or something along those lines. Where in actuality, it's like, well, you're kind of just hoping you get a good grade. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we see it a lot with society in general. I think we've all heard of a story where a teacher is complaining that when they do parent teacher interviews in high school or whatever, and they sit down with the parents are trying to blame the problems of their child on the teacher,
Yeah.
right? And that's something that I think we've all heard about. Whereas back when I was growing up, or at least with how my parents parented me, the that day, the parent teacher interview day was scary. I did not
Yeah.
want to. I did not want to hear the results. So because it was coming back to me, it was, you know,
Yeah. And you're just
um,
hoping the teacher wouldn't say like the shenanigans you were doing. They would just be
yeah,
like, they
yeah,
might play it off, like give me a solid.
yeah. You were slipping the teacher $5, right? Like,
They were
It's like,
teaming up on you.
yeah, the couple
yeah,
days before parent teacher were super nice.
yeah, yeah. They hand out the flyer on when the day is, and you become a sweetheart. Yeah. So stuff like this, I think, it's really detrimental overall to the individual children who are trying to become independent, who are trying to, like, this is your adult forming years, right? And if you simply don't have those skills because your parents are tracking your diet or helping you buy food or make food and stuff like this, um, then you're set behind, and it shows in the data.
It
Um,
sounds like it's a
mhm,
really like fine line though. Like in the sense you want to be like aware and be in your child's life, but at the same time also like promote independence and stuff.
mhm. Yeah, I think I also was reading some stuff about, like, where is this coming from the parental point of view, and we talked about protection from physical harm, but there's other psychological things. So one of those that is a big one is separation and anxiety. So the parents themselves become anxious about being separated from their children. Even if they're 16, 17, 18, and they're kind of grown up at that point, the parents are very much anxious, and that anxiety, it comes through as overparenting and taking on responsibilities for their kids because they feel stressed about having their kids in a different location than themselves. The other big one that I thought was really interesting is regret. So, how parents have regretted either their life decisions or how they've parented the kid comes out. And what they say, what you might think about regret is like, oh, I don't want my kid to make the same bad decisions that I made. So I'm going to prevent them from making any decisions, right, that are contrary to how I want it to go. And as Matt said earlier, we can't do that to kids. We have to let them make mistakes and play and be open. And that also matters for adults. Those adults need to make mistakes so that they can learn from them. So yeah, these two factors are big: separation anxiety and regret. Matt? Do you feel like when Nora leaves you in 16 years or something, you're gonna have these two problems, or what's the general take?
Yeah,
Do you think
I
you'll
don't
be
know how I'll
prepared?
feel. I can't really like gauge how I'll feel at that point, but like even now she's like very independent, so I think that's a big plus. Like I know my my mom works at a daycare, and then she'll have kids that are like 3 over 3 years old, some of them 4, and they're not dressing themselves,
Wow.
and that, I mean, to me that's so strange because even like Nora, even like, you know 4 months ago, 5 months ago, would be putting on her sweatshirts and her shoes by herself. You know,
Right.
not that like not that she's like advancing at a faster pace than other kids. It's just that like other kids are, every child is very different, and I think that's also been pretty well documented where it's very hard to kind of group kids, as like, oh, this kid has a high IQ. This is just because of that reason that they're doing better, and it's maybe a multiple factor of things, but like letting kids kind of learn how to use a zipper when they're just a year old isn't a problem, and then they're just going to naturally learn to
Hmm.
apply that knowledge to other things, and then kind of keeping kids away from that knowledge is just going to impact them negatively later. Instead of them just
Hmm.
learning it from the start. I mean, I remember when I was in, 'cause I used to work at a daycare as well. So there was one kid that was just like he was just huge. Like he was just like physically, he was like twice as tall as some of the kids. And just because of that physical appearance, he was treated as older. As like 2 years older than all the other kids. And then you'd be kind of talking down sometimes to someone else, and being like, "Oh, do you understand what I'm trying to say?" And like, yeah, they're kids. When teachers kind
Right.
of use that approach, it kind of peeves me off because they understand what you're saying. They know why they did something, but they would never apply the same kind of behavior to the person that looked older, just because he looked older,
Right.
and then he in turn would never kind of have the same kind of condescending dialogue, I guess, back to them, where it's like he would ignore them or something, but he would actually like answer the question, kind of get to the root of the problem, and then move on. And that kind of relationship is always better.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think from a research point of view, I kind of covered everything I wanted to cover, and I think Matt, you've covered most of your stuff. Johnny, is there anything you wanted to add about research? Because we are going to move on to discussion.
Just like the regret aspect that you mentioned a
Hmm.
little bit ago, I thought was really interesting. In the terms like you don't want your child to almost have like a similar to what you, because like they always like you want your child to have like a better life than you had, right?
Yeah.
So you try to steer them in that direction, and in steering them, you'd have too much influence on their lives. And like for me, I thought I was like kind of steering away from sort of like what my parents are or whatever.
Hmm.
And but then I like reflect back, and it's not so much life choices, but like how oddly similar I still am to like my dad, even though I feel like I've taken so many choices that are different. Like
Hmm.
and in order for the parent to like regret and try to steer the child away from what they are, it's almost like you're trying to go like swim upstream because like they're like product of yourself. Like,
Right. So like there's no way you're going to be able to prevent them from making the same mistakes you did because they're part of you, they're from you. Matt, what do you think about what Johnny
Yeah,
just said?
yeah. Johnny reminded me. I watched this one. I think it was a professor, but he was giving a talk about kind of parenting styles. He was saying how like people are putting a lot of focus on that, and then they're kind of disregarding kind of the genetics and the lived experiences aspect of those things in the same way. And he said that like genetics can play a very very big role in like kind of even the decisions you make in life, and they might reflect kind of the decision your parents have made. And then, so even if you're kind of offered the same decisions, sometimes they're not decisions just because, you know, because of genetic reasons. Maybe you're kind of swayed to one of the sides more, purely because of how you've grown up with your parents up until that point. So I think that was really interesting, where it's like kind of like he was placing less emphasis on kind of parenting styles and more on like lived experience and genetics quality growing up.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think that from here I want to move us to discussion because what we've been talking about thus far has been very top down. We're looking at in a wide scope at large groups of kids and stuff. But what I really want to talk about is how we grew up a little bit. Touch on about how we thought our parents handled us, for better or for worse, and how we think we're doing, because it shaped us, right? And it shaped us, our decisions about our whole life. So, Matt, I wanted to ask you, we talked about the three different styles of parenting, and maybe helicopter parenting is the fourth. How do you feel like your parents were with you? And is that something that you're trying to do with your daughter, Nora?
Yeah, they kind of let us do a lot of stuff, which I think, like I said, kind of with the whole playground example, like I think I benefited from that. I remember, we were giving hammers and nails when we were fairly young, and we started building our own tree house. And I like distinctly still remember to this day of like how it looked, and like in certain spots, nails would be sticking out, and I would know when I'm climbing the tree that there's a nail on my right hand side next to this like branch, so don't put your hand there. And like,
Right.
yeah, and we were fairly wild, but it also taught us to be a lot more aware of our situations, our surroundings. I think more physically active, and yeah, I can only say that like I benefited from that kind of
Mm-hmm.
free range.
Okay, here's a good question. What are you changing or modifying about how your parents raised you to raise your daughter? Is there?
I think it's rough because like when we were growing up, I think it was just like a different like society and different like structures. Like I said, with kind of like the urban landscapes. Like we're very kind of like city center, like where we're living right now. So like all we have access to is kind of like parks and like buildings. And
Right.
when I was growing up, we would like even now that's not the case anymore because in the past 10 years it's all houses now where we used to live. But it used to be a cornfield and then like stores on like a bit further away, a small like forest behind our house, and yeah, it wasn't the same because even though we would have like a park kind of like 20 minutes like down the road, we never went there. We would just kind of always play in like the foresty area. Or, like our backyard was large, so we could like kind of do whatever we wanted, and we owned it. But living in kind of like a complex with other people, you don't have that same like freedom. And
Right.
I would want to employ that more with Nora, but you just people don't have the same abilities.
Okay, so you kind of feel like you're at a discrepancy here. You're kind
Yeah,
of put back from where you were starting from.
yeah.
Huh. How
Okay, what about you, Peter? Your
Oh,
turn.
my turn. Well, I think my parents took a pretty like good approach to letting me come up as an individual. I specifically remember times when I was in a certain sport. I remember playing lacrosse for 2 years and being fairly good at it. And my mom got very involved with the lacrosse team and started donating and help fundraising and all this stuff. And then the next year I said, I don't want to play lacrosse anymore. And instead of her saying, well, I sunk all this time and money into it, she said, okay, well, what do you want to do? Right. Like this kind of approach to me, like was really helpful growing up, because I feel like I'm a jack of all trades, master of none currently, and I was constantly jumping around between things. And if I was focused, if my parents said, no, you're good at this one sport or this one thing, you're doing this, I feel like I would be so much worse off, because I would be I would hate doing that. Like my personality is to jump around. So I think that in that regard, my parents were super flexible and very helpful. And there's one other very specific example I remember about my mom's parenting style. My dad was the same. Was I had come home from school one year, and we were going to a local election, and it's just like some small election that I didn't even know who was in it. I didn't know who to vote for. I had no clue. I was like, why do I have to go to this? Like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go vote. She said, listen, you have to do 3 things to stay in this family. 1, go to school. 2, get a job. 3, vote. That's it. It's that simple. But to me, what she was saying was, okay, you have to work, but it doesn't matter where you work. Like, as long as you're happy with your work style. You have to go to school, but you can go to school for any subject you want. And 3, you have to vote, but we're not telling you who to vote for. This is something that I think is interesting, because in a lot of families, especially in the United States, you vote for who I vote for. Like, this is religion and political views are passed down.
Mhm.
But in my family, she said, just vote for who you want to vote for, but you got to do these things, right? So that's, like, to me, that's the perfect example of the authoritative form of parenting, where they have guidelines and rules, but they're not superly strict, and they respect my individuality. Um, yeah. Johnny, what about you?
Uh, they had the rules, but I'd say mostly pretty lax. Um, like there's I didn't I don't know, like when I was growing up, it was obviously like the school was important, but like it didn't really matter grades that much because it wasn't like my parents made it that far through their schooling. So like it was important to do well, but like if I got like a D in music or something, like it was not like a big deal. But I just it was almost like I wanted to do well to sort of like impress them though, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they kind of had that effect in a good way where I wanted to do good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of the opposite of like what helicopter parenting is happening, where kids kind of become resentful of that style of parenting, so they kind of try to rebel a little bit instead of like this. Like Johnny's parents were, they were, you know, obviously I think we all had similar kind of parenting styles where we had
Mm-hmm.
some of these like
mhm.
logical restrictions of just go to school, do your work, and that kind of just built a respect with our parents. I think that we all still have.
Yeah, John, do you think that your parents were more permissive, like they let you do what you wanted, or was there definitely some boundaries that you couldn't push?
Um there was some boundaries, but for the most part, I think looking back on it, it wasn't bad at all. Like there was definitely like a double standard going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like cuz I like with like my sister or whatever, I think she had a lot more boundaries when she was growing up.
Oh, okay.
And then for me, it was yeah, there was a lot less. Now whether it was their first child compared to their second or male versus female, I'm not entirely sure, but like we're like it didn't really hindrance either of us in terms of I guess growing up later on though. So
Well, that's your point of view,
well, that's yeah.
Johnny.
I mean,
Ask the sister.
well, I mean, in terms of society success, she's way farther ahead than I am. So maybe
Maybe
more
it worked.
boundaries was better.
Or maybe it's all genetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something we'll never know.
You guys
I,
think that, like, since we're talking about education and all that and how we've kind of developed, do you guys think that like helicopter parenting helps make make certain people kind of like exceptional? And like I know that like a lot of like Olympiad level athletes, they had very strict schedules. Their parents were always, even at a young age, kind of grinding their kids to like go to every practice, like eat these meals. You have to like stick to the schedule if you want to become like a top athlete. Do you guys think that like that helps make more of these people, or that's like
right. Yeah, I wonder because you're making an overall point that's very interesting. Is what are the benefits of helicopter parenting? All we've been doing is ragging on it and saying it's bad. But what could possibly be the benefits? Maybe somebody who's a brilliant pianist is able to focus as a kid all their time and energy into doing piano because their parents were taking care of everything else around them, and now they have like these amazing orchestras of music put out, right? Or there's athletes like you're talking about. I think that's something that is hard to really know um, with like research. Like, how are we supposed to go to every single athletic, like
Mm.
Olympiad athlete, and ask them how they were brought up? Like, maybe, but that's hard to get them all in one spot
Yeah.
to do the study. But you might be right that parents who are pushing their kids to become a brilliant athlete or something along those lines will naturally take care of their kids' responsibilities and do more things for them and be more of a helicopter parent. Um,
I
Johnny, what do you think? Yeah.
I I think like it that aspect can definitely breed that kind of like you've seen it in like chess as well, and like other sports more than just the Olympics and such. But there's only so many professional athletes and professional chess players. Like the ratio is got to be like horrendous. Like
Mhm.
just imagine all the failed students and such that didn't become a professional athlete, that lost almost their entire childhood.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe that's why like the depression rates for
Yeah.
the style of parenting is maybe more common, is because a lot more
Hmm.
stress is put on them to achieve these goals, and if they don't, it's a heavy burden.
I wonder. Yeah, I definitely wonder how you know as a parent. Like, for example, if Nora were to pick up an instrument and suddenly be amazing at it, and you kind of like you want to foster that, but you don't want to restrict her to only doing that. But you want her to, like, what if she is the next amazing whatever pianist or something, the next Mozart? Like,
Yeah.
how do you toe that line
Yeah.
between helping them and hindering them? And yeah, it's a tough question for parents.
Mhm.
I think in general though, you have to go with the approach that you shouldn't be a helicopter parent. You shouldn't try to interfere with their life. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Let, let's okay. If I, let's see if I can try to paint this picture in terms of like advertising for children.
Hmm.
So like in theory, there's a lot of like kind of downsides to sort of advertising to children. There's a bunch of countries that restrict it pretty hard or just completely ban it. Is it something like with just maybe even parallels to something that are like negative to children's development? Like is it something that should be the parents control, or like is it fine that the state sort of bans it? Like if it's something that the parents want to control, like such as advertising, and but with advertising being like everywhere and so prevalent, in order for the parents to control, like, say, what they're being advertised to the children, like, that could be controlling a lot of their life. So, like, that could essentially lead to helicopter parenting when they wanna do something what like, that will benefit their well-being as a child.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that advertising for children, like toys or whatever on TV, is naturally negative thing.
Yeah.
And as a parent, you maybe don't want them to watch those ads. Like, maybe you want them to watch a program, but you don't want them to watch the ads. So now you're stepping in every time the ads come in to prevent them from watching them, which in of itself is kind of a helicopter hover parenting attitude. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like, with ads being so prevalent, you have to control so much
Hmm.
in order to in order for you to think that you're doing well, like,
Yeah.
for their well-being, right?
Hmm.
Like, at what point do you when do you classify helicopter parenting bad and good in certain aspects? Like,
Like that.
to me, like, when your outcome is sort of their health and well-being, maybe being more of a helicopter parent might not be such a bad thing. Like, for example, maybe in advertising or maybe in screens or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, what do you think?
I
This is
mean,
something you
there
probably
might
are
be
going to
like
start dealing with soon.
yeah, but there might be like degrees of helicopter parenting. I think if there's like something that's like shown to be like a net negative, on people's lives, I think that is something that like maybe the state can kind of have a hand in, legally, because children have been shown to negatively affected by. I mean, everyone's been shown to have negatively affected by advertising, especially like maybe like today with like body standards and all these other examples. So I think like that is something maybe that the state can come in and help out with, because yeah.
We see it with some countries, right, John? You said that they have actually banned advertising to children, which to me
Yeah.
is crazy, because growing up I would watch TV and there's the Legos, or there's the new toy I want. Give me that new toy. And that was like a mainstay, but countries have banned that. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
like a children can view roughly 20,000 advertisements of just TV alone in 1 year. That's not even including like online or movies or print.
Wow. So Matt, how are you going to approach this? Because Nora's going to be getting to that age, even if she's not into the screen now. I think she will eventually. She'll be absorbed to it, right?
Yeah, I hate advertising, so I'm just, you know, I primarily use kind of like Netflix, some shows, and if it's not on Netflix, I always have ad blocker. but but it's just something that I think is just like I don't think a child should be exposed to that, anyway.
Yeah.
Like, and they're usually
Johnny, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, it's easy for like in hindsight to be like, oh, I didn't like have any downsides from watching all those ads. Like, I'll just my kid will be able to be exposed to them too. But like, not everyone afterwards is like becomes like so like self-aware of ads and awareness of them, right? Like not everyone
Hmm.
kind of develops that practice or is aware, and they like get consumed by the consumption or whatever, right?
Right. Consumed by the consumerism. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's easy for me like, oh yeah, I'm super aware of ads and stuff, like, but like not everyone is
yeah.
and gets manipulated and such, right? Like
Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
I'm kind of in favor of the state stepping in, especially since like kids under I think 3 should be exposed to like a certain frame rate and like speed of animations that are flashing and all that. Um, all these things have to be like toned down a bit for like kind of the toddler age,
Right.
just because
hmm,
of brain development. And
yeah,
then
totally.
what you have is you have a show that's fairly calming. They're like maybe like learning some basics, kind of like animal sounds or whatever. And then like all of a sudden cut to ad, which is usually like a certain
Bang pow.
certain
Yeah.
percentage like louder, just because advertisements are always louder than the program. You have like much more flashing images. You have like this intense like voiceovers, and like kids are looking at it, and they're kind of naturally being programmed to like look at things that now draw their attention in that system, and that system
Hmm.
is going to
Yeah.
be applied 20 years down the road when advertisements do the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that we've all have been perceptible to advertising at least once or twice in our life. We're not we're not perfect. I for sure have seen an ad and been kind of like, I want that. Let,
Yeah,
let me buy it.
100%.
But to get back to like what you guys are talking about is interesting, because it's how helicopter parenting has come to be. Almost, it's like, well, parents need to take these steps to avoid these bad things, and maybe it's advertising one thing today, and then screen time tomorrow, and then after that it's, oh, that kid down the street is he's got tattoos. I don't want my kid hanging out with that tattooed kid or whatever. But like, it kind of, I think this kind of technology is a new hurdle for parents, and I wanted to talk about that, because nowadays when you're going off to college or you're just walking down the street, you have a cell phone on you as a kid, and your parents can always be connected to you. And this is something that is being termed in the literature as the electric umbilical cord, which I thought was kind of funny. But parents are not, they're not cutting this cord. They're not letting their kids out of their sight or out of their mind, because they constantly can be in communication with them, whether they're 4 hours away in a different city going to school, or they're just down the road playing with their friends. This is something that is controlling the kid's life, and I think it's a negative thing, but it's also something parents are seeing as a resource. So, Matt, I mean, I think this is a tough question for you, but like what age do you think you're going to get your daughter a cell phone, and is it something that you're going to have to restrict a lot around her, or what's the game plan?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet, but I think generally, I think kids have been getting it at a younger age. But I can just say I know my aunt just recently got her daughter a cell phone, and that was when she was like 11, 12, which
Right.
some kids already had it at that point in her class, and then I feel like that's an okay time where like she starts walking alone to school or something like that, and then you just have a cell phone, just primarily just so she can stay in contact if she needs to. But it's I don't know. I wouldn't be that. I'm not that worried about it. I think I think we were all fine without cell phones. So
Yeah.
Like when we were growing up, when people had a cell phone, it was like all you could do is it only had like minutes on it, right? Like it was strictly for like call or text.
Yeah.
Like if you give like a child that's 12 a cell phone now, they pretty much have a computer in their pocket, right? Like you either have to be super, like you have to be sort of strict on what they can do with their phone at that age, right? Like you probably have to have some sort of parental controls, or else because you probably don't want like heavy usage of social media when they were 12. Like
Yeah, so the plan is, Matt, when your daughter gets to be 11, you give her a brick that's an old Nokia that
it only has Snake on it.
It only has Snake on it, and it only can call and text, and if you throw it against the ground, it's still fine. Right? One of those old guys.
That's a good option. Those are making a comeback anyway. Flip phones.
Yeah, the flip phones.
I mean, I might get her a smartphone only if it has like Raid Shadow Legends on it. Other than that, no deal.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to bring up, or do we have some questions maybe from John, backseat talker this time around?
Oh, I got a question for Matt.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Thoughts on corporal punishment?
Yeah, never. It's just, yeah, it's just I think it's just been proven that
it just doesn't work.
It's just so bad for kids, mentally more so than physically, Yeah. So I don't know.
Is there a certain style of disciplining your kid that you're implying, or?
Yeah, I mean, she has like temper tantrums now because she's gonna be 2, and that's what kids do. But
right.
Usually just want to distract them. That's what I've been doing. It's a super good tactic. You just start you find something, you just start talking about it, and then they'll forget what they were upset about because they get upset about everything. Or you just kind of get on their level, talk to them kind of calmly, and that sometimes that agitates them more, and then you just kind of move on very quickly to something else, and then they'll have still a temper tantrum, but it'll dissipate fairly quickly. So you just kind of have to elevate or just kind of gauge where they're at, and then make a decision based on that instead of kind of being I understand that some people are on a short fuse always, but I mean if you're having kids you have to work on that because then don't have a kid.
Yeah, it doesn't.
If you can't control your own emotions, how are you supposed to control others?
Right. But okay, let's say she's a little older now, though. She's 10 years old or something, and she steals something from a store. What's
stealing that?
I don't know. I'm just giving you an example.
She's going to jail. Get her out of here. I don't know. I mean, some level of kind of grounding where
it's a discussion.
Yeah,
it's something. Yeah,
yeah. It'd probably be if we got to that point, why are you doing all this? And all that. But I mean, yeah, it's so I don't know. Rough hypotheticals because I wouldn't even know how to approach it now. If that happened.
Yeah.
Then, yeah.
I have a question for you guys because I actually I know the answer to this because I found it in the research. But what do you think is worse for a child, a maternal helicopter parent or a paternal? So paternal father, maternal mother. Both of them are helicoptering. Which do you think is worse? Is it a trick question? They're both bad for the child. What do you think? Johnny, I'll go to you first.
You didn't give any time to think about this one.
I know.
At least if Matt stalled or something, I would think.
This is a rough one. Okay, I
Which
got
one
a good
is worse?
answer.
Okay, Matt,
I'm
you
gonna
got it.
Neither, because they
okay.
cancel each other out.
If they're both helicoptering, if they're
No, I'm
both
kidding.
intrusive,
They're equally bad.
it's two
Let
negatives make a
John,
positive.
yeah, let Johnny.
Okay, John, what do you think?
Johnny's got it.
If there is one, I would guess just to be like a contrarian. I'm gonna guess mother.
That would be worse.
Yes.
Okay, and Matt, you're still saying they're equal?
No, one's got to be worse. Maybe
Which one?
maybe the dad.
Okay, so you're just obviously taking the opposite opinion of John.
Well, I can explain why, but
Okay, explain why. Explain why.
I think I think once it comes to like controlling um, things of that nature, of like activities and all that, I think dads can be a lot more strict and kind of obsessive over those things.
Okay, that's a decent answer, and I think you're not too far from what's actually correct, according to one piece of research that I read, and that was that maternal sort of like mothers being helicoptery is deemed more to be normal by the child, which gender norms and all that societal stuff we can discuss in a different conversation. But what is kind of expected of a mother is they're more loving and doting and helpful, and they'll do stuff for the kids. But when the father does it, and the father is also kind of seen as more reclusive and detached from the emotions of a child, right? This is the normal, what's expected from the child's point of view. But when the father is doing a lot of overparenting, it's more stressful for the kid because it's not deemed as normal. Like when the father is more invested, the kid feels more stressed and anxious to live up to the standards of the father, or the fact that the father is taking so much time to do things for the kid feels as though they're doing more things wrong or something along those lines. So Johnny was wrong, Matt was right.
Do you think
At
that it's
least,
because of like the gender norms, or do you think it's because like people naturally have a deeper connection with the mother, since because of the natural child rearing processes and birth
yeah,
that happens.
yeah, I think it's in part both. I think for sure you kind of have a natural more attachment to a mother,
Mm.
or something along those
Or
lines,
like
right?
if you had like an adopted child from an early age, would they still kind of find the mother figure to be more, or not? That's kind of interesting.
Right. That's a good question. I think it has to do with society's view of the mother, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Society is viewing a mother as more protective and, um, you know, uh, in tune with a kid's
Yeah,
emotions, stuff like this.
yeah. The natural
So,
spend more time with they spend a lot more time with the child than the father does on
mhm,
average. I think I found like a
yeah.
pretty interesting graph where like it shows over the past, I think, like 4 decades of how many hours per week like the
Hmm.
mother and the father
Hmm.
spend with their child, and like they've both been on the incline, but the mother has definitely also been kind of sharply increasing.
Right. And I don't want to say to fathers out there to not be involved in your kid's life. I'm just saying that what's happening is that helicopter parenting is bad, and we want you to understand that it's slightly worse for fathers to be helicopter parents to young adults, um, because of the reasons I already listed. But
So what you're saying is that
yeah,
fathers
I
should
thought
separate even more.
Yeah. You have to decide beforehand that the
yeah.
mother draws the short end of the stick and they have to helicopter.
No, just saying if you have to, let the mom do it. No, I'm just saying in the data, it shows if father's helicoptering, it's worse for the child. I wanted to touch on one last thing before we wrap this up, and that is the situation with COVID and how we are trying to adapt and live our lives. But Matt, you have a baby, it's COVID, and you've already addressed slightly how it's affecting your parenting styles, how it might be affecting everybody. Um, what are you what have been the biggest struggles for you with the pandemic? What do you think are the biggest struggles for all parents in the pandemic? Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big I'm a big advocate for like the whole lived experiences um, aspects of child. development. So like, I think she should be
Mhm.
like going to these certain places where like she just, we're trying to keep her away from, so she has like minimal contact. And so even we have
Mhm.
minimal contact, so we're not like around people that are in the same like locations or like in close spaces where you can do some of these activities.
Mhm.
And I think that she's like not benefiting from that. But on the other side, I think like people are like super obsessed with, and oh, children are being hurt like socially, that they need to like engage with each other, and like I think that's true for like certain age groups. But for Nora right now, um, when me and Vanessa were watching a documentary before we had Nora, I think it was like mentioned that children under like I think 2 or 3, like their whole social, like all the social cues they get, all, like the majority of their engagement like socially and like how they benefit from that is purely from like parents and like close relatives. And like you know, I think on that front she's doing
Okay.
fine. I don't think like COVID's like impacted that
Mm.
for like kind of the toddler range group. Especially when she goes to the park and she'll play with someone, like one of the kids there, and she won't be shy at all. So that also might just happen to be like a genetic, I think, benefit that she's never like
Right.
shied away from like other
But
kids.
you're saying, yeah. But what you're saying on the whole is that like kids at a young age are not super impacted by being separated from each other because they're mostly picking up
Yeah,
social stuff
yeah.
from
As
their
far as like the
father and
social,
their mother and their aunt and uncle.
yeah, but as far as kind of
Yeah.
the lived experiences, I think we're all kind of being negatively affected by that part. You know.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just remember like during our first shutdown when schools first closed, and then when with all the kids being at home and stuff after like a few weeks, everyone's like suddenly like really valuing teachers
Yeah.
because they have to teach their kids while like working and stuff, and they're like, oh man, like my kids suck. Well, not actually that part, but
Well, it's true. I was
Yeah, it's
to
true.
do some
And you're trying to like
prep
focus on
for.
work, and like it's super distracting. So I can feel it like all those parents, especially if they're like 8 years old and doing shenanigans.
Mhm. I think it's true because I was also listening to to prepare for this podcast. I was listening to another podcast called Nurture versus Nurture, which is an interesting podcast about how parents have different ways of parenting, and it's the two parents are kind of battling out how they want to go about raising their kids. But what this and it was from uh, a child psychologist was helping them through it, and like somebody who was a family psychologist was helping them through it, and that she was the host of the podcast, and she would say often kids are boring, like your kids are super boring and you have to listen to them talk about whatever random shit, and it's super boring and they kind of suck sometimes and you want them to just go away. So I guess that's natural. I mean, obviously you love your kids and you want them to be great and you want to help them in all sorts of regards, but sometimes they are boring, and I think parents are like you said, Johnny, kind of getting more of a taste of that with COVID.
Mhm.
You know what I think? I think that this might be a hot take, but I think it's going to do the reverse for parents. It's like it's going to reduce the amount of helicopter parenting because they want their kids out of the house. They want them to kind of be out, like going to parks, seeing other like friends and stuff. Like after the pandemic has kind of wrapped up and we've all been vaccinated, we have herd immunity going on, where the parents will maybe be more like, go out, see your friends. I don't want to see you anymore. Like, just I'm not going to be there, kind of thing. They're sick of their kids,
Yeah, that's a
you know.
that's a lukewarm take. I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
makes
It's
sense.
not.
It makes sense. So
Yeah.
what about the families that got to spend really good family time together since no one's was working and stuff?
You think they're going to be more? They're going to be more connected, and they're going to want to stay closer to each other. Is that what you mean?
Maybe they had good experiences because they got to do more stuff together
good
rather
experiences
than
with
everyone
family.
doing rather than everyone doing their own thing.
Maybe I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
And
I'm just saying
I got one more
that was
question
my.
for you guys. Do you
All
guys
right.
think that like helicopter parenting is more common now because people are having children kind of later stages in life, and I think kind of people when they're older they start being a little more worried about certain things and their kind of
Hmm.
place in the world, or do you think it has nothing to do with age?
I think it might, and I think, like I kind of talked about earlier, is you're kind of seeing a kid as a cosmetic part of you nowadays, and that's because you're having kids older, and because you're having kids older at an older age, you're less likely to have more of them, right? So if you have only one or two or three compared to like five or six, that was more on average before, you have more energy and time and resources to give to these one or two kids, and you feel more like they're a reflection of you to the rest of society. I definitely think it's causing more helicopter parenting. John, what do you think?
I don't know. I think Matt is making a good point. Like when you're like young, say like 25 or whatever, like you're almost more like rambunctious and stuff. Like you're like, oh yeah, the kid will like survive or whatever. Like he can do this. Whereas like if you're like 40 and having a kid, you're like your body is almost starting to not be as great. So you're almost like imposing that on the children. Being like,
Mm,
oh, you shouldn't hurt yourself. Like,
right. It's a different frame of mind. Yeah.
yeah, potentially.
Okay. Well, with that being said, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciated your insight into everything parenting. From you're our relative expert because we don't know anybody else who has kids. That's not true, but we really
I was gonna say.
yeah, we appreciate you coming on. You're one of our oldest friends, and it's always good to have a chat with you. Until next time, I guess this has been Helicopter Parenting. If you want to reach us, if you disagree completely with everything we just said, you think we have terrible takes, and all of our research was complete trash, please email us at iqmindspodcast@gmail.com. That's iqmindspodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, when we give you something to think about, bye bye.